Hi there, my name is Scott Arthur, and right now I'm the convener of the Transport and Environment Committee here in Edinburgh. And this afternoon I'm sitting on the curb line on Rizelaw Crescent, and the reason for that will become evident in a few seconds. So next week my committee meets, and as ever it's looking like an interesting committee, and if you've got time I would encourage you to tune in, perhaps with some popcorn, I don't know. So I'll talk through three of the most interesting things I think that are on the agenda. The first is we're looking, I think it's the third time since the 22 election, we're going to be looking at a workplace parking levy. So for those of you, a reminder, the Labour administration in the previous two attempts to progress this hasn't been keen and in fact has opposed it. And that's because of some of the predictable consequences that would come with it. You know, displacement parking, people parking in residential areas adjacent to workplaces rather than paying the charge themselves. And then additional impact is the real concerns we have and also trade unions have about the impact on low paid staff and also staff that work shifts. So it's really because neither of those points were addressed in previous discussions around workplace parking levy that we didn't support it. The SNP, Greens and Lib Dems have supported it so far, so that's been enough votes for it to progress, and there's an update coming next week. Now, interestingly, this looks at some of the negatives and positives that would come with the scheme. I mean, Edinburgh is Scotland's worst funded local authority by the Scottish Government, so undoubtedly the workplace parking levy income would be very welcome, so that's a huge positive. But we still do have to deal with those negatives, and I did outline a couple a few minutes ago. So I fear Labour's going to be in the same position where we can't support this unless we see really robust approaches to dealing with those negatives. And hopefully they will come forward. Hopefully we'll see other council groups, willing to engage with the concerns that trade unions have, and put forward steps to address them and work in partnership with them. But we'll see what happens on the day. The other thing that's coming before the committee is road condition, always popular. So of course this year the administration did support an additional £11 million worth of funding going into roads and footpaths right across the city, and people have seen new surfaces appearing, hopefully if not on their street, one nearby, and we're still working our way through that £11 million to make sure as much of the city as possible benefits. But that was only 1 year of funding. And it's fair to say that, that money aside, over the last few years, road and footpath condition has been deteriorating, and basically that's because not enough money has been spent on it. I mean, there's no other reason. So, and part of the problem is that it's been used. The money's been taken from road and footpath conditions to fund other projects or to fill gaps elsewhere. Budgets are never easy. But so what I was keen to change was to make sure that when council groups are setting budgets, particularly around roads and footpath condition, they're absolutely aware of the impact of that. So what is coming before the committee next week is a number of different models which looks at road and footpath condition and models what the impact will be over the next 10 or 20 years on the road and footpath condition based on different funding scenarios. So what it shows is if we set aside £11 million, what it shows if we continued on this trajectory before that extra investment, road and footpath condition will just continue to deteriorate. And so really it's indicating that councillors have to pull their socks up and think about how we can fund this, because the condition of some of the roads and footpaths are absolutely unacceptable in the city and shameful actually. So hopefully going forward, council groups will see. So I'm just resting my arm here because I'm getting a sore arm. Council groups it'll be clear to council groups and residents if political parties are bringing forward investment plans for roads and footpaths, which means that they are going to deteriorate. And of course we've seen that this year. I mean, we supported £11 million going into roads and footpaths. And I think two of the other parties supported I think it was £600,000, if my memory serves me right. I mean, that wasn't even keeping up with inflation. So whilst the £11 million is really just starting to slow down the deterioration and hopefully making a small improvement, £600,000 would have been in a terrible state just now, particularly if the winter ahead of us is a tough one. Okay, so always interesting. So the third thing that's worth speaking about, and there is other things of course, is the the weed control in the city, which is going to be before the committee. So always a difficult subject, and you can see the street behind me. There is a bit of weeds along the curb line if you look carefully, if you look very carefully. And so for a lot of people, they don't mind this and they think it's great having more nature in their street. Others think it's a bit unsightly. Uh, Personal concern I have around a street like this is that weeds along the curb line, particularly these larger weeds which you see here, can be a trip hazard for people. And of course the roots as well do work their way into the cracks and widen them. And that's something that the ice in winter really loves to get into and make it worse. So it's not just about the weeds themselves, it's about those additional impacts too. But nonetheless, the cheapest and easiest way for the council to deal with weeds is to use weed killer. And the weed killer is pretty unpleasant stuff. The staff have to be very careful when they're working with it, and they also have to be careful not to spray too much of it because of the negative impact it can have on the environment. And in fact, we get, as well as regular complaints about the number of weeds in the city, we do get regular questions from the public about, are we doing enough to absolutely minimise our use of weed killer, and what more can we do? So this report next week looks at that. And it also acknowledges that the types of weed killer available to the council have reduced over time, and the one it currently uses, I think there's a risk that it may become banned at 2030, I think was the date that was mentioned, and it has been linked, but it's not an overwhelmingly proven link. It has been linked to cancer and other really serious health conditions actually. So what the council hopes to do over the next 3 years is wean itself off that weed killer and look at different approaches. And that will start with our green spaces. We'll reduce the weed killer use there and hopefully use other methods. And then over the 3-year period, under monitoring, we'll start to reduce weed killer right across the city, including in residential areas. Now, hopefully, I'm hoping that doesn't mean that weeds are just going to be rampant in our streets, and streets maybe turn into this one or look a little bit worse. The council is looking at different methods of controlling weeds, which doesn't involve these horrible chemicals. All sorts of weird and wonderful approaches are coming onto the market. But so far, the best approach is just the old one, which is mechanical. So they do have vehicles with really stiff brushes on them, which are strong enough really to remove those weeds as it goes along the curb. It's much more expensive, obviously, but it is much more expensive than weed killer, but it doesn't have the same negative impact on the environment. And it's worth remembering, we talk a lot about the climate crisis, but the planet also faces a biodiversity crisis, and absolutely reducing the use of these chemicals has to be part of our response to that. So not an easy one, just like, all the topics, whether it's road condition, the funding challenges there, whether it's the workplace parking levy, balancing off all that lovely money with the really quite serious negative impacts it could have. And also thinking about how we can reduce weed killer use without, making our streets trip hazards for residents, particularly elder residents, of course. It's really tricky. So hopefully we'll work our way through this agenda with input from the public where appropriate. Of course, councillors always welcome emails, and the committee quite often gets deputations from people on these important issues. Hopefully we'll work our way through these and we'll reach the right decision for Edinburgh. Okay, I'll place a link to the agenda in my post here, and feel free to look at those reports and get in touch if you have any questions. Okay, I hope you're able to enjoy the rest of this sunny Saturday afternoon. It's feeling quite nice sitting here at the edge of the curb. It's not always easy to say that in September, but I do understand the weather's going to turn tomorrow, so please make the most of it. Okay, bye for now.